Before anything else, drop a like right now, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications, because today's topic is the kind that completely changes how you see where the team stands and could shape major decisions over the next few months. That early support genuinely matters so more people get this content and so we can keep bringing deep breakdowns like this. Honestly, there are situations in the NBA that feel too good to simply ignore. In the middle of all this turbulence around Giannis Antetokounmpo, rumors that come and go, backroom talk boiling over, executives working the phones, there's a parallel story that slipped past a lot of people, but it says a lot about basketball, context, confidence, and player development, and that story revolves around Jordan Poole. Yes, the same Jordan Poole who became known as Poole Party, the guy who used to set games on fire off the bench, who played with a smile on his face, and who looked like he had a massive future ahead of him in a Golden State Warriors jersey. It's impossible to talk about this without going back a bit. That 2022 title run wasn't special just because of the trophy. It was special because of how the team played, the chemistry, the creative freedom inside a system that was extremely well-defined. And there, in the middle of Stephen Curry, Klay Thompson, and Draymond Green, a young Jordan Poole emerged. Confident, fearless, bold, capable of putting up numbers that aren't common for someone his age in high-level playoff basketball. He didn't just score. He swung moments, broke defenses, and made it all look light, almost natural. Back then, playing next to Curry seemed to unlock something in him. The gravity Curry creates on the floor opens space in ways very few guards in history can. Defenses stretch, rotations are half a second late, and that half second is gold for a player like Poole. Cleaner looks, drives with less contact, simpler decisions. The result was a 2021-22 season where he flirted with something close to 50% from the field, 40% from three, and 90% at the line, plus averages of around 17 points a game in the playoffs. That's not a footnote. That's real grown man production in the heaviest part of the season. So when news breaks that the New Orleans Pelicans have taken Jordan Poole out of the rotation and that he's now being discussed in trade conversations, the shock is inevitable. We're talking about a player who, not long ago, was seen as a core piece of the future. Now he's showing up at just 37% from the field, with reduced minutes, 2 straight games without seeing the floor by coach's decision, and a clear sense that he's losing his place. It's heavy. There's no softening that. In roughly 28 games this season, playing something like 25 minutes a night, he's still putting up numbers that, on paper, aren't horrible, about 14.5 points per game. In a different situation, that could be considered solid. The problem is how those points are coming. The efficiency has dropped off a cliff, and in the modern NBA, especially for guards, efficiency is almost everything. When you shoot 37% from the field, you start to become a drag on the offense over multiple possessions, especially if you need the ball in your hands to produce. Of course, context matters. Creating guards and wings naturally run lower percentages than bigs who live at the rim. No one expects a player in that role to sit above 55% all the time, but there's a minimum line. For someone who has a real spot in a rotation, you want to see numbers in the 44%, 45% range, something that keeps the defense honest. Below that, defenses start to sink, go under screens, and dare the jumper. And once that happens, the game becomes much harder. From three, the picture isn't encouraging either. There's some confusion in certain reports, but the most coherent view points to around 33%, which is far from ideal for a player who built his reputation as an explosive perimeter scorer. He's still a good free throw shooter, which shows the touch is still there, but the rhythm, the confidence, and the decision-making clearly aren't the same. And that leads to a fundamental issue: system. Basketball isn't played in a vacuum. Players don't exist in isolation. The same athlete can look like an all-star in one context and like a problem in another. In Golden State, Poole had a very specific role. He didn't have to be the brain of the offense every possession. He came in to speed the game up, punish disorganized defenses, attack closeouts, and take advantage of the chaos Curry and Klay created. When that role changed, when he started getting watched more closely, guarded more tightly, pressured to create something out of nothing, Errors started showing up. That became very clear the season after the title, when turnovers turned into a serious problem. The more creative responsibility he took on, the more rushed decisions appeared. Forced passes, drives with no angle, contested shots early in the clock. It wasn't a lack of talent. It was too much load for a player who was still learning to read the game at the highest level. Since he left the Bay Area, something seems to have broken. And it's not just stats, it's posture, body language, facial expression on the floor. That almost youthful joy gave way to a heavier look. And it's impossible to ignore the emotional impact of what happened behind the scenes. Getting punched by a teammate in a professional environment is something that sticks. Even if you try to move forward, it messes with anyone's head. There were even awkward moments off the court. In a recent interview, a child asked him directly what it was like to get punched by a teammate. That says a lot about how that incident got glued to his image. It's brutal. And at the same time, it's human, because we're talking about a young player dealing with pressure, expectations, and a narrative that spiraled completely out of control. Even so, it's hard not to root for Jordan Poole. He's got charisma, he works hard, and when he's right, he's genuinely fun to watch. A lot of people truly believed he'd be the guy who would inherit the keys when Stephen Curry started to fade out. The natural successor, shaped inside the system, learning day after day from one of the greatest guards ever. That didn't happen, at least not yet. And that's exactly where this story connects to the present. Because when you look at the current Warriors situation, especially with the real possibility of a major push for Giannis Antetokounmpo, one question becomes unavoidable. Who leads the second unit? Who keeps the offense afloat when the starters sit? Who takes responsibility without stalling the system? Giannis changes everything. He raises the team's ceiling instantly. Defensively, the idea of a lineup featuring Giannis, Draymond Green, and even someone like Al Horford is simply terrifying for any opponent. Rim protection, versatility, switching, anticipation. It would be suffocating. Stephen Curry, even if he's not an elite defender, is solid one-on-one and benefits massively when surrounded by smart defenders. But offense isn't just raw talent. It's fit. It's flow. And when you start projecting rotations, you realize someone has to carry the ball, create shots, and keep pace when Curry sits. Names like Buddy Hield, DeAnthony Melton, Brandon Podziemski, Moses Moody, and Will Richard come up in that context. All useful. All with specific strengths, but none of them, on their own, bring that controlled chaos element Poole used to bring at his peak. So the question isn't just whether Poole is good or bad, it's whether he can become the right player again in the right environment. And that opens up uncomfortable conversations about sacrifice. To bring him back, who goes out? Podziemski, Moody, Will Richard? Losing young guys like that hurts, especially for a franchise trying to balance present and future. But it also hurts to watch a talent get lost in a situation that clearly doesn't suit him. And all of this is happening while the Giannis rumors keep getting louder. Right now, the Warriors are being mentioned as one of the favorites in these conversations. Executives are moving, scenarios are being simulated, packages are being weighed. Mike Dunleavy Jr. is active, calling, checking, trying to figure out how to build something competitive without completely blowing up the foundation. The core point is simple and complicated at the same time. Giannis moves the needle. He turns a good team into a real title contender. But he doesn't win alone. You need complementary pieces, players who know exactly who they are and what to do on the court. If the price to land Giannis is giving up multiple young players, then replacing those minutes becomes crucial. That's where the idea of a rescued Jordan Poole, with a clear function, restored confidence, and less creative pressure, starts to make sense to some people. Not as a savior, not as the main star, but as an important piece of a much bigger puzzle. And this debate is anything but simple. It involves numbers, emotion, past, and future. It involves believing a player can rediscover his best version of himself if he's placed in the right spot at the right time. When you try to fit all these pieces together, what becomes clearer is that the Jordan Poole discussion shouldn't be treated as something shallow like he works or he doesn't. What's really at stake is understanding how players get shaped by context, expectations, and, most importantly, well-defined roles. The Poole we see today, out of the rotation with ugly numbers and shaken confidence, doesn't erase the Poole who was decisive in big games, who grew in pressure moments, and who looked completely comfortable inside a winning system. It's also worth remembering that very few young players enter the NBA ready to be a true number one option. Stephen Curry didn't become Stephen Curry overnight. He spent years making mistakes, learning, being underestimated, sharpening his reads and decision-making. The difference is he had time, stability, and an environment that allowed that growth. Jordan Poole, on the other hand, got pushed very quickly into a role he might not have been ready to carry. When he leaves the Warriors, he doesn't just change uniforms. He takes on a completely different level of responsibility. Suddenly, the ball is in his hands more, the opposing defense builds game plans around him, and his mistakes aren't diluted inside a strong collective anymore. They're exposed. Every turnover weighs more. Every forced shot becomes a headline. Every bad night becomes a warning sign. And here's something a lot of people ignore. Confidence isn't abstract. It's built every day. When you start getting DNPs, when your name shows up in trade rumors week after week, when the public narrative becomes decline and frustration, that gets into a player's head. Even the most talented feel it. Even the most confident wobble. Basketball is physical, but it's deeply mental. That's why the idea of a return to the Warriors isn't just nostalgia. It's basketball logic. In a scenario where the team is going all in to compete right now, with Stephen Curry still playing at a high level and a potential Giannis Antetokounmpo arrival, you need players who understand the system, who can play without monopolizing the ball, and who can produce in limited minutes without complaining. That was exactly the role Jordan Poole played best. Picture a context where he doesn't need to be the savior, where his job is clear. Run the second unit, push the tempo, punish bench defenses, keep the scoreboard moving while the starters rest. Picture him getting back to advantage situations, attacking closeouts, playing loose again. It's not a guarantee, but it's a far more favorable environment than one where he has to create everything from scratch against defenses designed to shut him down. Of course, none of this happens without a cost. The market doesn't run on wishes. To bring in a player like Poole, someone has to go out. And that's where the hard decisions start. Brandon Podziemski has shown toughness, feel, and energy. Moses Moody has improved defensively and become more reliable. Will Richard looks like an intriguing bet. Letting any of them go hurts, especially thinking about the post-Curry future. But that's where the title window comes in. It isn't eternal. It doesn't wait for perfect development. When you have a chance to build a roster with Curry and Giannis together, you take risks. You accept that the distant future might get murkier in exchange for a real shot right now. And in that context, betting on a player who has already worked in-house, who knows the culture, and who's still young enough to reinvent himself stops looking insane. At the same time, nobody can pretend Poole's issues would magically disappear. The decision-making lapses, the tendency towards turnovers when asked to do too much, those would still need controlling. And that only happens through tactical discipline and clear boundaries, something the Warriors have historically been able to enforce when necessary. This also helps you understand the Giannis situation better, because even though all the focus is on him, no blockbuster move happens in isolation. If the Warriors send young players, draft picks, and contracts to land one of the best players in the world, they have to fill the gaps smartly. It's not enough to stack stars. You need balance, depth, and players who accept their roles. And maybe that's why Jordan Poole's name keeps popping up, even with all the doubts. He represents both risk and opportunity. Risk because the recent decline is real. Opportunity because the talent didn't vanish. It's just buried under layers of wrong context, too much pressure, and shaken confidence. At the end of the day, this story is less about cold numbers and more about timing. Being in the right place, with the right people, at the right moment in your career. Some players explode when everything aligns. Others get lost when the structure fails. And few cases show that as clearly as Jordan Poole. Now the big question comes back to you. Does it make sense to gamble on that reconnection? Does it make sense to bring back a player who was once an essential part of a title run, even after everything that happened? Or is the risk simply too big, especially at a moment where every decision can define the season's success or failure? Drop your opinion in the comments because this debate is nowhere near over. If you think Jordan Poole can still contribute at a high level within the Warriors, write yes. If you think they should go another direction, write no. I want to read what you think. And if you made it all the way to the end, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. It helps the channel grow a lot, and make sure you don't miss any important updates on this crazy market, trades, rumors, and decisions that can change everything in the NBA.